The psychology of enough. Why some people feel rich on $50,000 a year while others feel poor on $500,000. There is a man who makes $22,000 a year. He grows his own vegetables. He fixes his own bike. On Sunday nights, he eats dinner with 3 friends, and he sleeps 8 hours a night without a single thought about money. Ask him if he feels rich, and he will look at you like the question is strange. Of course he does. Now meet a different man. He makes $640,000 a year. He has a corner office. He has a watch that costs more than most cars. And at 2 in the morning, he is lying awake doing math in his head, recalculating whether he can really afford the house he just bought. Because somehow, despite the zeros in his bank account, he feels like he is barely keeping his head above water. Same species, same planet, same year. One man is rich, one man is poor. And the income numbers tell you almost nothing about which is which. This is not a feel-good story about how money doesn't matter. Money matters enormously. This is something stranger and far more useful. This is about a switch inside the human brain that determines whether any amount of money will ever feel like enough. And once you understand how that switch works, you can never unsee it again. In the 1970s, a psychologist named Philip Brickman ran a study that should have made headlines for decades. He tracked down people who had won the lottery, people whose lives had been transformed overnight by sudden, enormous wealth. And he compared their happiness to a second group, people who had become paraplegic after catastrophic accidents. Here is the part that breaks people's intuition. Within about a year, the lottery winners were not meaningfully happier than ordinary people. Some were less happy. And the accident survivors, after their own period of adjustment, often reported daily satisfaction, not far from where they started before the accident. The conclusion was not that money is meaningless or that suffering doesn't matter. The conclusion was that the human mind has a baseline, a kind of emotional home setting, and almost everything that happens to us eventually gets pulled back toward that setting. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. Your brain is quite literally engineered to stop noticing things that stay the same. Think about the last time you got a raise. For maybe 2 weeks it felt incredible, and then your brain quietly redrew the map. The new salary became the new normal, the new floor, the new, of course this is what I make. And almost immediately, a new ceiling appeared above it, a new number that would feel like the real win. This is the treadmill, not a metaphor, an actual documented mechanism in your nervous system. You can run as fast as you want on it. The scenery does not change. But hedonic adaptation is only half of the story. The other half is even more brutal, and it explains the man lying awake at 2 in the morning with $600,000 in the bank. Human beings do not evaluate their resources in isolation. We evaluate them in comparison. This is called reference point theory, and it was formalized by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, 2 researchers whose work on decision-making eventually won a Nobel Prize. Their core insight was simple and devastating. We don't ask, is this number good? We ask, is this number better or worse than the number I am comparing it to? For most of human history, your reference point was the village, 40, maybe 150 people, which, not coincidentally, is roughly the size of the social groups our brains evolved to track, a number anthropologists now call Dunbar's number. If you had a slightly bigger hut and a fatter goat than your neighbor, you felt rich. The brain that evolved to compare itself to 150 villagers is instead comparing itself to a curated highlight reel of millions of strangers, influencers, college friends who got a better job, a guy from high school posting from a yacht he definitely financed. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real local rival and a stranger's filtered photo. It registers both the exact same way, as a threat to your status. This is why the man with $600,000 can feel poor. His reference point is not the global median income, where he would rank in roughly the top 1% of the entire human species. His reference point is the other partners at his firm, the neighbors on his street, the version of himself he constantly imagines could be doing better. He is rich by almost every measurable standard on Earth, and he feels like he is failing because the only scoreboard his brain is reading is a local one. And on that local scoreboard, someone is always ahead. This is also why the man on $22,000 can feel rich. His reference point is his own father's harder life, his own past struggles, the small, stable community around him where he is doing fine, maybe even a little better than fine. His scoreboard says he is winning, so he feels like he is winning. The dollar amount was never the deciding factor. The scoreboard was. So here is the uncomfortable question this raises. If your sense of having enough was never really about the number, but about the scoreboard your brain happens to be reading, what happens if you simply changed the scoreboard? This is not a hypothetical. Researchers have tested it directly. Studies on income and well-being, including the well-known work by Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, found that day-to-day emotional well-being rises with income up to a certain point, and then largely flattens. More recent research by Matthew Killingsworth complicated that picture, showing that for some people, happiness continues rising with income even at high levels. But here is the detail almost nobody talks about. In Killingsworth's data, the people whose happiness kept climbing with more money were disproportionately the same people who already reported feeling generally happy and in control of their lives. For people who were already unhappy, more money past a certain point did almost nothing. The money was never broken. The scoreboard was. This single fact rewires how you should think about your entire financial life. It means that focusing purely on the number, chasing the next raise, the next bonus, the next milestone, while leaving your reference point untouched, is like sprinting on a treadmill that is bolted to the floor. You can win every race and still end up exactly where you started, just more exhausted. So what actually moves the needle? 3 things, all backed by research, and none of them involve making more money. First, deliberately shrink your reference group. This sounds almost too simple, but the data on social comparison is consistent. People who spend less time consuming images of wealthier strangers report higher financial satisfaction, even with identical incomes. This is not about willful ignorance. It is about recognizing that your brain cannot tell a real rival from a stranger's filtered post. So you have to manage the input the same way you would manage what you eat. Second, anchor your comparisons backward instead of sideways. Comparing yourself to the people ahead of you triggers status anxiety. Comparing yourself to where you were 2 years ago triggers something psychologists call temporal comparison, and it reliably produces gratitude and motivation instead of dread. Same brain, same wiring, completely different emotional output, depending entirely on which direction you point the comparison. Third, and this is the one almost nobody does, deliberately set your own reference point in writing. Decide, on paper, what actually looks like for you, specific numbers, specific lifestyle, before the treadmill has a chance to quietly move the goalposts for you. People who do this, who define enough in advance, are dramatically less susceptible to lifestyle creep because they catch the moment. The goalposts try to shift instead of discovering it 2 years later at 2 in the morning. Here is the real twist in all of this. The goal was never to want less. Wanting more is not a character flaw, it is a hardwired survival mechanism, the same one that pushed your ancestors to build, explore, and improve their position for thousands of generations. The actual goal is to make sure you are the one choosing the scoreboard, instead of letting an ancient tribal instinct and an algorithm built to maximize your scrolling time choose it for you. Because the man on $22,000 and the man on $640,000 are not actually playing different financial games, they are reading different scoreboards. And the moment you realize you get to write your own, the question of how much is enough stops being something that happens to you and starts being something you finally get to decide.